sober since August the 15th of 2001. And for that short amount of time, I'm as grateful as I know how to be. And it's good to be back in Canada tonight. I was an early arrival and my bags all got here. It was great. And Ali, thank you for extending the invitation. I'm really grateful to be here tonight and be sober. I knew this was going to be a good night, and I'll tell you how I knew that. Because there's ways you can tell, you know, early on whether it's going to be a good day or not. This morning, I got up and went to the gym, and my neighbor next door, he was outside, and he waved to me, and he used all 5 fingers. So anytime something like that happens, you know it's going to be a good day. You know, he didn't give me the international salute of ill will. I got all 5 fingers. I go, man, I'm rock solid today. It's going to be good. And I know there's some new people here tonight. And so for you people that are new, if you don't hear anything else I say, please hear this and remember this. If you're new or you're nearly new, you're wanted, welcome, and needed in Alcoholics Anonymous. You're absolutely wanted, welcomed, and needed here. And we are so grateful that you're here. And, you know, so grateful that you can find us on Zoom. You know, some people talk about in this weird time we got, people find Alcoholics Anonymous. Let me tell you, if you're desperate enough, you'll find Alcoholics Anonymous. Our book's clear about that. But we have done everything. I think Alcoholics Anonymous, the fellowship, has done everything possible to make the message available to alcoholics while we've been in this lockdown. So anyway, my task tonight is to talk about step 11. And in doing so, when Ali called me and asked me about a topic, you know, I had some topics in mind, and then just all of a sudden, in a sleep one night, I woke up and I thought, no, this is what I need to talk about, and I chose that part of the book on the bottom page 87, top of 88, because that's the trick for me. It's the real trick. And so when we arrive at step 11, when I arrive at step 11, this idea of seeking, soughting. I got a buddy of mine, Randy, down in Georgia. He and I were at a meeting one day. I was out in Georgia, and he and I went to this little meeting out in the country, and we got there early. And this lady, she said, a Southern lady, said, "What you fellas doing here?" And Randy just looked at her without missing a beat. And he says, "We're salting." She said, "Salting?" He said, "Yes, ma'am." It says right there, salt through prayer and meditation. We hear salting today. And so that's what I'm doing here tonight. I'm salting. You know, I'm still a salting. And I hope I'm salting till the day I die. I hope I'm in some kind of mode of being able to seek. But the deal is, I arrive at step 11, and the deal is, how did I get here? I mean, how did I get here? How did I get to step 11? You know, I'm a guy that came to Alcoholics Anonymous, not because I thought it was a good idea, not because I thought, geez, I really got a drinking problem, and those people at AA seem to be helping people with that. I need to go do that. I didn't come to AA for that. I came to Alcoholics Anonymous to get back in the house. I was thrown out again. I had a newcomer plan. If I come to AA, everything's settled down. I'll eventually manipulate my way back in the house, 30, 40 days. It'll settle down. I go back to living my life the way I was. That was a great idea. It was a great plan. One of the better plans I've come up with, except on day 40, I took drunk. It just struck me. It's out of nowhere. I just, you know, accidentally got drunk that day. You ever had that? Just accidentally get drunk? Not even mean to. Well, this was rather intentional. I've been sitting in AA for 40 days, miserable. I'll tell you why I'm miserable, because I'm sitting in Alcoholics Anonymous and I don't have anything else. I don't believe I'm alcoholic. I'm in AA, not because I believe I have a problem, because I believe I can get there. It's a means to an end. I go there to get back home. And what I didn't know then, what I absolutely know today is this: that if you remove alcohol from my system, I don't get better, I get worse. See, our book talks about that I'm in the grips of a progressive illness. Over any considerable time, I get worse, never better. 40 days is the best I could do. I walked directly out of an AA meeting to a bar and started drinking on a Thursday and came home on Sunday, because that's how I roll. You know, I didn't know I had this bodily allergy, and I didn't know it was coupled with an obsession of the mind. And when I start drinking, you know, we're going to do some, you know, Jekyll and Hyde kind of stuff. We're going to have some personal adventures. maybe an expedition or two. We're just going to do some stuff. There's always a crash site. I don't know when it's going to be, where it's going to be, or who it's going to involve. Always a crash site. I crashed on Sunday, and nobody was happy to see me at my house. I've been gone for 3 days and thrown out once again back to AA. And I had this moment on August the 15th of 2001. We talk about it in here. The book refers to it as this incomprehensible demoralization. We talk about it sometimes as the gift of desperation. I just call it a moment of grace, just a moment of grace. And in that moment of grace, what happened for me is one of you got in there and you carried a beneficial message to me, a message depth and weight, and which I pushed all my chips to the middle and went all in Alcoholics Anonymous. And then we began to talk about and read that book and learn about, unfortunately, that drinking was just a symptom. Now, prior to coming to Alcoholics Anonymous, everybody in my life had said one thing consistently to me: you got a drinking problem. I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, guess what they said? You don't have a drinking problem, you got a drinking solution. Your problem is living life without alcohol, having to live life on life's terms. And that's correct. Now, if you're new or you're nearly new, don't run home and tell people that. Just let them believe you got a drinking problem for now. We'll ease them into that later. There's no use to shock them this early. Let's just let them think that. We need to know the truth. We need to know what the deal is. But Don took me through that book and he talked to me about selfishness and self-centeredness. Well, listen, I don't know about you all, but when I came to AA, if you just said, Clif, make a list of the top 100 problems in your life, selfishness, self-centeredness, they ain't even making the list. They're not getting on the top 100 because I'm a giver. I mean, you all know this. I bet all of y'all are givers too, but always with a hook. It's always with a hook. We're like the Mafia here. Someday I may ask you to do something for me. We're more like the Mafia than we really know, because this is the reality. AA is like the Mafia. Family everywhere you go, and if you leave us, you die. So there you go. So if you're new, stay here, man. But I don't know about how self is so rooted in my system. I don't understand. I don't really appreciate that. Through a process of inventory and from really studying the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And if you're here tonight, I'll just tell you this is my belief because I believe it's true. You should read the book 9 or 10 times and then start studying it. I mean, really studying it, really getting in it. And if you really study our book, it's just filled with great information. When I got here, they said, Clif, you'll be excited. They wrote a book about you. I was so excited. And it's true. They did long time ago, and it still holds true for me today. But I suffer from this delusion. And the delusion is that I can somehow wrest satisfaction and happiness out of this world if only I manage well. It's the second greatest delusion in the life of an alcoholic. What the first, of course? That I'm not alcoholic. But of course, that delusion kills more of us than anybody. But that's followed closely behind, even in sobriety, that somehow I can wrest satisfaction, happiness out of life I manage well. So I get this idea of self. And the third step prayer, the great thing about the steps, and you're probably thinking, he was here on 11, he's on 3. Where's he going here? The deal is the steps are interwound. The steps are interrelated. In step 11, the reason I chose that topic tonight, because that statement brings us back to step 3. We constantly remind ourselves we're no longer running the show. I don't know about you all, but in the morning when I get up to do my prayer and meditation, I get really spiritual. I mean, I'm almost like the Dalai Lama down here in Oklahoma. I mean, I'm spiritual. I mean, I could almost reach water walker status, so spiritual. I could probably take a shower with my socks on. You guys know what I'm talking about, just spiritual, just in the groove, But seriously, when I'm in the morning, I'm communing with God. I'm by myself. I'm reading. I'm engaged in meditation and prayer. I have a group of books I just pull randomly, and I'm communing with God. And it's a spiritual time. I give myself an hour or so a day just to meditate, just to pray, just to commune with God. And in the evening when I get home, when I sat down at night to do that first part of step 11, that spiritual exercise of reviewing my day, when I sat down to do that, it's just me once again. It's me and God. And we're sitting down, and I begin this reflective review of my day. Was I selfish, dishonest? Was I afraid? Was I selfish? You know, I go through this idea because I ask God for more clarity. Because sometimes in the midst of the day, I don't have good clarity. So I ask him for clarity. And in that moment, as I'm doing that reflective review at the end of the day, it's a very spiritual moment. It's just God and I. And in that moment, you know, again, I can attain that water walker status, that idea that, hey, I did really good today. You know, I didn't make anybody mad. I'm not mad. You know, I'd be spiritual again. And our book talks about that. Have you ever noticed the language of our book when it talks about in the morning, it says, we consider our plans. It doesn't say we tell God what our plans are. It says we consider our plans. You know how this works. You know, we make plans and God laughs. We consider what we're going to do before we launch out on it. And considering what we're going to do, form a meditation. But we start to consider what we're going to do. The tough part for me is in the meat of the day. See, in the morning, it's me and God. We're good. We're communing. We're wonderful. And in the evening, it's me and God. We're communing. We're together. We're wonderful. But the trouble with me is I leave my house, I hit traffic. I don't know if this ever happens to any of you or not. If you really want to know, I'm going to give you guys give you some inside information about spiritual condition. If you really want to measure someone's spiritual condition, there's two simple tests you can do, and you can try this on your own. The first simple test is this: ride with somebody. The other thing to do is watch people when they're in a crowded restaurant with a slow waiter or waitress. Watch how they react. It's the best barometer of spiritual condition. How do I react to that? One time, a bunch of us were up at a deal up in Kansas. My sponsor lives in Kansas, and this guy was just giving this little waitress heck. And finally, she came back, and he said, my sponsor says to her, said, can I have your, you know, the little apron? She said, can I have your apron? And she just kind of looked, said, just let me borrow your apron. And she said, okay. So she gave that and handed to this guy that's giving her a hard time. Said, here, why don't you show her how to do that? Why don't you show her how to do her job better? Why don't you go do that? You know? So to measure spiritual conditions, put ourselves in high pressure situations. And that's the meat of what that passage is about in our textbook. That paragraph that's found in it says that as we go through the day, we pause when agitated. Well, that's anything that we find in those four things in step 10 that will agitate me. Selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, fear, any of those things will agitate me. And when those things crop up, it says we pause. How do we pause? We tap the brakes. That's the biggest deal, to get in the pause, to tap the brakes and tap into God. Because we can all be spiritual in the morning. We can all be spiritual in the afternoon. But the meat of the day, where the rubber hits the road, how are we doing then? You know, how am I doing in that part of the day? You know, we have this safety chain that we always look to, that we say, hey, look, well, I can do a 10th step and make amends. But I've always viewed the 10th step, when I'm having to say to you, hey, I'm making amends in step 10, as a total failure of the 10th step. If I've blown past the pause, and now the amends is the safety net. This is when I've fallen off the high wire. You know, I didn't pause. I didn't tap into God. And so we get this safety net, which I'm grateful we have, this safety net to remind us that, you know, when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, the idea that I was somehow spiritually sick was a foreign concept. When Don talked about and showed me the book of Dr. Silkworth's writing of allergy obsession, and as I laid my experience against that, starting from the standpoint of, I'm never doing this again. And then walking myself through how I started to drink again, to begin to identify the peculiar mental twist to really see what our book spends 28 pages describing in detail, that we drink on a dry mind, that no matter what's happened to us, I'm still picking up a drink stone cold sober. I can't raise it to the level of the suffering of a week or a month ago. I'm without that defense. I have no idea that the nature of that is the nature of a spiritual disease. The only time the word disease is ever used in the big book is that part in step 4, when it says we've not only been physically and mentally ill, we've been spiritually sick as well. It talks about a spiritual disease. And I have no idea about that. I don't know about how my own willpower has failed, how human power has failed me. I know nothing about that. And so as I come along and I begin to identify character defects, I begin to make amends. And now, as the book talks about, we've entered the world of the Spirit. We don't talk about that a lot here. The book talks about the fellowship of the Spirit. You all have the fellowship of the Spirit. That's what we're here about. We know about that. Oftentimes forgotten fellowship. We talk about it in the book a couple of times. We talk more about the fellowship here with each other. But the book talks about in step 10 how we've now entered the world of the Spirit. And what that's talking about, as I look at that and say that I'm now awake. And once I become awake, I become aware. And once I become aware, I know. And once I know, that now I'm faced with some real, what the book talks about, dilemmas. Difficult choices when I arrive here, when I arrive at this point. And in looking at this, I'm one of those people who there's another kind of delusion that I have suffered from being in Alcoholics Anonymous. And that was delusion that I would tell you that I am actively engaged in a 12-step program, but not being actively engaged in step 11. I would tell you, if you ask, oh yeah, I pray and meditate, and I just lie. I just lie. Because I come here with what the book talks about, old ideas. Now, I read in there about meditation, and I think I know what that is. I know what that is. I don't need to ask anybody. I know what that is. I saw Kung Fu when I was growing up. You get in the lotus position, you put on some candles, you get in a dark room and, snatch this pebble from my hand, grasshopper. I know what meditation is. I don't need to ask anybody, but I know I can't do that. I know I can't do that. So I'm just going to tell you I meditate and lie. And that's the delusion I suffer from. I'll tell you I'm actively engaged in a 12-step program. I'm not. I'm really not. And it's my experience here from talking to a lot of people. If there's a particular area that people struggle with, it's this idea of meditation. Slowing down, the idea of slowing down. Prayer so much. I think a lot of people, we learn prayers here early on. We get shown prayers early on. We learn all about selfishness, self-centeredness. We get ready to make a decision. First thing they do is put us on our knees. We start praying. We get down with we go into our 5th step. We pray before we do that. We pray, after we find these things objectionable. We're just to pray a lot here. And I read recently that Gandhi said that praying is not asking. It's a longing of the soul. It's a daily admission of one's weakness. And I like that because that I so identify with that. And prayer became a matter of rote for me. Prayer became something that it seemed rather easy to do. But stopping and trying to figure out meditation, because my mind just goes too fast. And so I don't think I can do it. So therefore I don't. But I'll tell you I do. Until I was brave enough one day, which just takes a lot of courage, to actually ask for help. It's a different kind of help because, when I come to Alcoholics Anonymous, whiskey has done its job on me. I've been beaten into a state of reasonableness. and I'm fully, I'll do anything. You know, remember that day? I'll do anything. I'll do it. Jumping jacks. I'm in. You know, 4-mile run going right now. I mean, it's whatever. I'm willing to. I don't know what any links looks like, but I'm in. And so I've been beat to that state of reasonableness where whiskey was concerned. But what happens is I get here and I get comfortable. And I don't know about you, but what happens for me is that the recuperative power of the alcoholic ego is phenomenal. Phenomenal. Doesn't matter how much we're beat down out there, we get here. Don't you love this? I know you've done this. You guys have sponsored people like this. They get about 6 months and they start talking about the newcomer, the guy that keeps going in and out like they're suddenly some kind of Dalai Lama, you know, online going, idiot. You were living in the streets 6.5 months ago. What do you mean you don't understand why he keeps going out? You know, forget it. We forget. We got that quicker forgetter even about our brothers and sisters who struggle. But this recuperative power of the alcoholic ego makes it difficult sometimes for me to ask, how do I do that? One of the great spiritual principles I've learned here is that I don't know. Can you help me? Those are very difficult things for me to sometimes do. It is a humbling exercise. And I don't know about you all, but in my big book in the back, there's no graph that says at this point in your sobriety, you should be at this particular level of serenity, happiness, joyousness, freedom. I don't have that in my book. But what happens for me is my ego begins to get in the way, and I don't want to talk to my sponsor about that. You know, I don't want to tell him that because I need him to think I'm doing okay. This is the vicious cycle of delusion that I can be in Alcoholics Anonymous. This is the idea that somehow now I'm back running the show again. It's subtle. It's extremely subtle here. It creeps up on us all the time. And I'm going to talk about my personal experience with being creeped up on here. Because I always say the same thing, and maybe you said this before too, and it starts something like this: I'll see it coming. I'll see it coming. Let me tell you about alcoholism for this cat. Alcoholism leaves my front door, turns the corner, and waits on me. Patient, extraordinarily patient. And what alcoholism wants more than anything else on this earth, it wants to separate me from you. If alcoholism can some way separate me from you and cut me from the herd, it's already begun to win. It's already, and so, you know, when the book talks so much about action, which we all know there's a considerable difference between action and activities, not to say that activities aren't important. It's what helps us. It helps with the fellowship. It keeps us together. But the actions in the book, so important for a guy like me to stay connected. You know, sometimes people will say to me, and I've been guilty of saying this too, you know, I don't feel close to God anymore. I'm sure you've had moments where perhaps you didn't feel the connection. You know, sometimes I feel like the prayers are hitting the ceiling or whatever. I'm sitting quietly and I'm not hearing anything. When that happens, what my sponsor always says to me, he says, you know, if you don't feel close to God, you need to see who moved. Who moved? And if you want to feel closer to God, you need to see who needs to move back. I'm going to tell you, and every time he's had that conversation with me, which I dislike, by the way, it's always been me. I'm the guy that's always moved, and I'm the guy that always has to move back. Because the deal is that, you know, Alcoholics Anonymous and sobriety, recovery, actions in Alcoholics Anonymous, the things we do here to stay awake. You know, the greatest promise I believe that our book offers is this awakening that we have in step 12, having a spiritual awakening as the result of the steps. I mean, as a result of the actions I've taken in the first 11, something's going to happen to me. I'm going to come awake. The biggest deal here, stay awake. if we did a poll of people in this room of 15, 20, 25 years plus, even 10 years plus, and they could tell us, but particularly the old timers here, people who've been here 30 plus years, they could tell us story after story after story of people who come into Alcoholics Anonymous, came here, took the actions and the steps, came awake, and slowly but surely they began to backtrack to the steps. You know, they took their wheel back in 3, went insane in 2, and drank again, and left. So having awakening is great, but staying awake, that's the real deal here. And that's what step 11, combination of 10, 11, that's what they're about, is staying awake here and fully engaged in the program of Alcoholics. This idea that I can't do meditation. I finally took the courage to ask somebody that I can't do this. And the guy that I ask about this is the guy that's doing my book study tonight that I have in Oklahoma City on Tuesday nights. Ask him to fill in for me tonight. And what he told me was, it's because I finally have the courage to share with somebody a shortcoming, an old idea about how I can't do meditation. I just can't do it because I just can't stay quiet. And so what he turned me on to, he said, well, have you ever heard about contemplative meditation? Contemplation. No, what's that? And so he turned me on this book. He said, I'm going to suggest you get this little book. It's called 1 Minute Wisdom. It's by a guy named Anthony DeMello. It's not conference approved, but I'm just telling you what I did. You don't have to do it. It's what I did. 1 Minute Wisdom. He said, I want you to read that one story a day. It'll take you 30 seconds or less to read the little story. He said, I want you to think about that story, about how it applies to your life. He said, I want you to do that for 5 minutes. Just start with 5 minutes. And I thought, okay, I'll do that. So I get the book, little bitty book, and I start to read it. And I start to do 5 minutes. I'm just going to do 5 minutes. I read the deal, and I began to think about the first story I read in there. On about day 6 or 7, I'm not really sure where that was. About day 6 or 7, this thought came to me at the end of the 5 minutes. That sounds a lot like something I've read in the big book. I'm going to go find that. And so off I go, scurrying through the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous to try to tie this together. And so what started out as 5 minutes, what eventually happened to me was it grew into an hour. Because here's what I found out about meditation. It makes you thirsty, spiritually thirsty. This idea of seeking, soughting, as my friend Randy would say, to seek, I became thirsty to seek more, as thirsty as I did for booze, to seek the spiritual information, to plug into these great contemplative writers of our time and of thousands of years ago, hundreds of years ago, and begin to tap into those to expand this connection. Because the idea here is this, is that if I leave New York City on a boat and I'm going to sail to London, England, and I get 1 degree off. Now, 1 degree doesn't sound like much. I mean, barely even notice it right here, 1 degree off. But over time, particularly if you're sailing around the world, if you're sailing on a round basis that spins, 1 degree off, over any period of time, it begins to look like this. It begins to diverge. And what happens is that you end up somewhere else. Now, I was giving a talk in Florida a few years ago, and there was a couple of Navy guys in the audience, and they felt compelled to calculate that for me. And after the talk, they came up and said, Clif, we calculated that for you. If you leave New York City headed for London, England, and you get 1 degree off, what happens is you end up in the south of France. And I thought, this is perfect. Because this is me in alcohol. This is me in AA 1 degree off. And I'm not saying we don't all get off. Don't get me wrong. I'm saying is what happens for me today, because I have a connection. I have a actions that I do, that I have a routine that I'm in. It's almost like, Google Maps. Rerouting. It gets me back. But if I'm 1 degree off here, what happens if I don't do anything, just get 1 degree off here, end up in the south of France, where does that put me? That puts a guy like me in a place I wasn't going, with people I don't know, speaking a language I don't speak, in wine country. And that's exactly what happens to me here. I end up, if I get 1 degree off and I don't put anything else in there, if I've got no connection, if I'm not rerouting, if this connection is not rerouting me, helping me get back. And that connection doesn't just help me to reroute me because I get struck by a bolt of lightning. No. See, I really believe that part in We Agnostics where it talks about we have 2 choices, that the world's spinning nowhere, doing nothing, headed into nothing. But we have a second choice, the belief that we're God's intelligent agents, ever advancing His creation. And the great part of that is I believe that's what all of you are. And I have you. And God has you. And you're God's intelligent agents. Some people, they can be going down the road, they can be off, they can just say, man, I'm having a real bad day. And a butterfly lands on their windshield wiper and they think, oh my God, that's it. Now I'm back connected to God. Life is good. Everything's wonderful again. I'm a guy that needs a tree to fall on my front of my car. I mean, I need something a little more dramatic than a butterfly. I need to be kind of shook. And see, God's got His intelligent agents here. So if I'm active, if I'm off, if I get off here, if I continue to be engaged in prayer and meditation, even when I don't feel like it, the 12 and 12 says, if we suspend it, we just resume as soon as we can. But if I just try to continue to be engaged in something, because there's days I'm like, I don't want to read today. Rebellion dogs us every step of the way. I'm just defiant. I don't want to read today. I don't want to go out, sit on my back porch where it's beautiful and I have this, watch the morning. I don't want to do that today because I'm defiant. I'm defiant. Why? Selfish is self-centered to the core. Selfish is self-centered to the core. I have to be reminded that I'm no longer running the show. The book in that step 11, it says, we let God discipline us in the way we've outlined here. Now, discipline sounds like a bad thing. It sounds like I'm going to be whipped again because I used to get whippings when I was a kid. But it's a discipline. It's an exercise. It's a commitment. If I want to be good at something, I have to have good discipline every day. If I want to run a marathon, I'm just not going to show up for the race and take off. I have to get into a discipline of exercise, eating properly. I have to train. That's the discipline I have to do. And that's what this step is calling for. And that's what I get in because I'm defiant, because I still have self-will, because I can still be that person that the psychiatrist called us, childlike, grandiose and childlike. I can be that. But what I know is this: if I just continue to power through that, if I just continue, even if I go give myself 5 minutes, if I just pick up something and read something out of a book, if I just look at that, then what happens to me is this: that I engage with you all, and you're God's GPS. And what you do is you help Him reroute me. You get me back on course. What happens is I'll call Joe Ben, because Joe Ben and I talk frequently. And I'll call Joe Ben, and because Joe Ben and I talk frequently, what will happen is I'll call him and he will hear it in my voice that I'm off. And he'll say to me, are you okay? Because you know why? Because you all are God's intelligent agents and you care. You know why? Because God cares. And he will say to me, are you okay? And I might try to blow him off because I'm selfish and self-centered, because I want to sit in my mess for a minute. I want to sit on my pity pot because I'm comfortable in my misery, by God. But what happens is that he won't just let it pass. If I talk to him again and he says, I know there's something wrong, what will happen is I'll share that with him. And what Joe Ben will say, he'll say something to me to start to begin the process of getting me back to God. And that's what the essence of how I need to be reminded that I'm no longer running the show. The third step prayer talks about relieve me of the bondage of self. When I really first looked at that prayer, I didn't think much about it, but the more I've studied it and the more that I really meditated on what the prayer means, You know, what it's really saying is, God, I need out of being a slave to me. You know, I have been a slave to self my entire life. Now, I grew up on those old Tarzan movies with Johnny Weissmuller. Some of y'all grew up on those too. And in them old Tarzan movies, sometimes they'd have those slave ships. And they'd be down there. And in those slave ships, they'd have the slaves, they would be shackled around the throat. Their arms would be shackled to the oar. Their feet would be shackled. And behind them would be the slave master with a whip. And they would row, row, row. And see, that's what the third step says to me. I'm a slave to self. I'm shackled. I'm enslaved to self. And what happens is that what the power that I found in Alcoholics Anonymous has, to the best of its ability, done everything it can to free me of slavery to me. Yet it loves me enough to give me the opportunity to take it back. When our book tells us, we constantly remind ourselves we are no longer running the show. Thy will, not mine, be done. We say that many times throughout the day. Why? I'm prone to go back to self. It's my, we talk about defects of character. Bill could have just as easily called them defaults of character. I'll default right back to those just as quick as anything. There's a particular practitioner that I love, a guy by the name of Thomas Mertens. And some of you may read Thomas Merton before, but he's got a poem that was in his book, Entering the Silence. And I love it because I think it so applies to me, and I think it applies to perhaps you as well. And it says this, it says, "Good shepherd, you have a wild and crazy sheep in love with thorns and brambles. But please don't get tired of looking for me. I know you won't, for you have found me. All I have to do is stay found." See, that's me. I'm a wild and crazy sheep. I'm in love with thorns and brambles. I like to live on the edge. Sometimes in sobriety, I like to live on the edge. My sponsor sometimes says, "Clif, if you're not living on the edge, I swear you believe you're taking up too much space." I'm in love with thorns and brambles. And see, God has found me. What step 11 does, it allows me to stay found. It allows me to continue to reach back to that power which I've discovered here. It allows me to stay found so that I'm not wandering abroad, so I'm not 1 degree off ending up in wine country again. This constant trudge that we do here, this trudge that we do, it's a lot like walking up a down escalator. As long as I'm moving up on that down escalator, I'm making progress and I'm ooching towards the top. I'm walking with a purpose. I'm walking towards that top. And the minute that I stop, the minute I slow down, back down I come. I found that my spiritual condition and my life in Alcoholics Anonymous is a lot like that. As long as I remember what it says on page 20, that my very life depends on my constant thought of you and how I can help you. If I can try to always remember that, if I can remember to tap the brakes and tap into God in the meat of my day, if I can remind myself over and over again, I don't have to be a slave to self today. I've been freed from that. And the way for me not to be continued to go back into bondage is to stay in constant communication with God and stay in constant communication with you all. I'm so grateful to be here tonight. I'm really glad Ali asked me, and thank you all so much for paying attention. Appreciate it.